This summer, we're inviting you for a very special double feature book study, diving into Small Groups, Big Results by Dr. Julia Lindsay and Rock Your Literacy Block by Lindsay Kemeny. Over 8 weeks, we'll dive into practical research-aligned strategies to help you build a more intentional literacy block, strengthen your small groups, maximize instructional time, and head into back-to-school season with a little more pep in your step. You'll get live weekly discussions, recordings, planning supports, and a community of passionate educators learning alongside of you. If you're ready for practical implementation and not just theory, come join us this summer. It's the summer of the Lindsays. Head to the link in the show notes to save your spot. You're listening to episode 97 of Literacy in Color. Today's episode is such an important conversation for anyone thinking deeply about literacy systems, MTSS, and strengthening Tier 1. I'm joined once again by returning guest, Dr. Sarah Brown, whose previous conversation around MTSS for reading improvement with Dr. Stephanie Stoller was such a favorite among listeners. And this time, she's joined by another co-author of hers, Dr. Kimberly Gibbons, to discuss their book, Effective Universal Instruction, an action-oriented approach to improving Tier 1. This episode really digs into what strong universal instruction actually looks like in practice, from leadership and coaching to collaboration, fidelity, systems thinking, and even sustainable school-wide change. We talk about why intervention alone can't solve literacy struggles, why Tier 1 truly is the foundation of an effective MTSS system, and how schools can move beyond surface-level implementation to create meaningful outcomes for all students. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. I am so excited to be joined by a returning guest, Dr. Sarah Brown, who is the co-author with Dr. Stephanie Stoller. That was a wonderful episode that we'll link in the show notes. And she has brought another fellow co-author of another book that they have written, and that would be Dr. Kimberly Gibbons. And they've also put together a wonderful book that can help you really implement MTSS effectively in your school, and it's called Effective Universal Instruction, an action-oriented approach to improving Tier 1. I just want to get started by saying welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here today, and perhaps you can give us a little background about who you are and how your work relates to the area of literacy.
So I'm Sarah Brown. I'm really excited to be back, Michelle. Thank you so much for having us. So I am a school psychologist by training, but not a traditional school psychologist as many educators think of them. I've never actually given an IQ test in a school. So I was trained to all in teaching and education, helping teachers and in actually instructing in literacy and really in how we learn. And so I've spent my entire career in supporting teachers and leaders all around literacy and effective implementation of using data in systems to improve outcomes. And I think Kim's going to share how we came to co-author this book. She actually invited me into this great project, but I found I was doing a lot of work around around tier one because schools I was working with in my job as bureau chief for the state of Iowa over MTSS and special education, for about 3 years, we were doing work. And with large groups of schools, we found that we weren't actually doing work in tier two and tier three as schools really expected. We were really living in tier one because that's where the data were really focused in. So that's what really brought me to tier one. And then I was working closely with Kim, and I'll let her introduce herself and how we came to this work.
Thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this. My name is Kim Gibbons. Just a few things about me. I was also trained as a school psychologist at the University of Oregon back in the 1990s when dibbles were being developed. And like Sarah, my training was really less about administering tests to students and being the gatekeeper to special ed and more about collecting the right kind of data that would help teachers know whether their students were benefiting and growing from instruction. So I made my way from Oregon to Minnesota to do an internship at the St. Croix River Education District, which is a group of 6 districts here in Minnesota. And I worked for a year as an intern and then really decided that my passion, I loved the training I got as a school psychologist, but I really wanted to operate at a higher systems level. So I stayed there for 20 years. I worked as a staff development coordinator for 3 years, a director of special ed for 7 years, and then the executive director for 8 years. Add that all up, it should come up to 20 years. But where I did my internship was kind of a little bit of the birthplace of CBM. So those group of school districts did all of the field testing for the curriculum-based measures that were being developed in the 1980s out of the University of Minnesota. So I was able to really step into a system before MTSS was a term, before RTI was a term, step into a system that was really all about database decision making and improving outcomes for all students and preventing students from needing more intensive services and including special education services. I moved away from SCRED in 2015, and I've been at the University of Minnesota since then. I'm the director of the Center for Applied Research and Educational Improvement, which is a college-wide center in the College of Education and Human Development. And I have a great job. I work with districts all over the country who want to get better at getting better about literacy, math, MTSS, you name it. So what brought me to the Tier 1 book was I was approached by a publisher to consider ideas for a new book. I had previously worked with them on some different books. And at the time, I was still working at the St. Croix River Education District and had the experience of really working in a system where large numbers of kids were not proficient in literacy. In fact, back in the day, we had about 20% of kids, 11,000 kids proficient. And we didn't solve that problem by jumping in and providing intervention support. We did, a lot of what's now referred to as the science of reading. We did that back in 1997, 98, and along with that, started with the RTI framework and got really good outcomes. So my interest in the book was really everywhere I was going consulting. Everybody wanted to just prioritize tier 2 and tier 3 when their tier 1 outcomes weren't where they needed to be. So again, I just really come at it from that prevention standpoint. It doesn't mean that the work is easy, but it is the right work that we have to really make tier 1 as effective as it can be for all students. So I thought, why not write a book that could really be helpful to practitioners and educators? So Sarah and I had worked together. She shared the passion and commitment that I had to the work. So it was a no-brainer to ask her to partner and join, and rest is history, right?
Absolutely.
What a fabulous co-authoring relationship you have in collaboration. And I admire your rich history and background and all the experiences you've had. And I love this idea of just helping districts get better at getting better because It's hard work, and there's no easy fix, magic wand solution. And sometimes we have to really roll up our sleeves and know the moves and how to adjust our instructional decisions or systems in order to improve those outcomes. So I thought maybe we can start with just grounding the conversation in defining what tier one is exactly. Because I know as MTSS is gaining popularity, it's nothing new. Like you said, this kind of work has been around since the 90s, even RTI. But people have different ideas of what the tiers actually mean. So when you say tier one and when you define tier one in your book, what are you referring to?
Tier one, so when you think of the pyramid itself, I want teachers to think about all of the resources in your school. So I get asked often, does the pyramid include my special education students? Does the pyramid include our gifted program? And in reality, the pyramid doesn't include your students at all. It includes all of the resources in your school. And so it includes all of your programs because your programs are really resources. There's some teachers, they might be some funding that you can use to buy really great evidence based materials, or it includes your schedule and how you use that time. So it's all of the resources that you have access to. And tier one are those resources that everybody in your school can access. And so think of the schedule. So the schedule, when you think about literacy, it's those minutes in the literacy block that are dedicated toward your tier one kind of core reading block. So it might be, we think about 90 to 120 minutes in many cases at the elementary level. Some schools might need a little bit more in order to get really good growth. It includes your general education classroom teachers. It might include your core curricular materials. Hopefully you have some of those. It includes your instructional strategies potentially that all of your teachers at your grade level, if you have multiple sections in your school, have agreed to use because you know they're evidence-based. So maybe you've learned about a common vocabulary routine. Maybe you learned one from Anita Archer and you're all using it within your grade level because you know it's evidence-based. And so you're all going to do that because everybody at your grade level is getting it. It's part of your tier one. And so it also includes then all of your assessments that everybody's getting. So your universal screening, any common formative assessment, or your curriculum embedded assessments that come within your core programs that you're giving maybe every 5 or 10 lessons that your PLC is using to look at to decide what you might reteach or that you might go and you might extend learning for. So it's all of those things together make up your tier one.
And I just think back to the book and the conversations that we were having when we started was that we really had to define tier one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm struck still that sometimes that's to me is the first step is building consensus around what is tier one and having like that working definition that is driving the work, because there are still a lot of misconceptions about not only tier one, but the whole multi-tiered instructional framework.
100%. There are a lot of assumptions in many schools too, from principals to teachers. And I guess if there are teachers listening to this, they might have ideas about that, right? Like what their principals might think is their tier one and what they know is their tier one and what their students need. So thinking about, like I have an activity that I use with schools that I work with where I just have listed out, okay, what are your materials, your time and your schedule, your instructional strategies and your assessments, and then have a conversation about and document those things that are the consistent across all classrooms within your grade level that make up your tier one.
And I appreciate your clarity in saying that this doesn't involve your students. We often hear this is a tier two kid and this is a tier three kid. And so we can sweep that away and really think about our resources. And I think that's why even the title that you chose for your book, it just opens your eyes to view it in this way because you're saying universal instruction. Tier one is going to be the same across the board horizontally, or there's going to be vertical alignment across grades too. It's not just I close my door and I have tier one happening within my four walls. It's like this whole system that's integrated together as a unit. When you do say effective universal instruction, what might that look like in practice? And I know that this is a really nuanced question and it could be different from school to school, but what are some qualities of a classroom really doing the work right or a school doing the work right?
I was really excited about this question because I just spent last week in 2 buildings. In every classroom at the elementary level, we have a foundational skills curriculum at Cary called Functional Phonics and Morphology. And I was in a district that was using that curriculum, and I'd been out there in the fall, and so I was coming back again in the spring. Boy, did it fill my bucket. And so when I saw this question, just reflecting on what I observed last week, and I observed in every classroom very tight, explicit, and systematic instruction, lots of opportunities to respond by the students, really good feedback from the teachers, correcting errors immediately rather than waiting on that. I saw high levels of student engagement. And I don't even think it mattered if it was kindergarten or fifth grade or anywhere in between, but the vocabulary that I was listening to these students use was so strong, really academic vocabulary that it's been a while since I've been in classrooms. It was just very impressive. I saw evidence-based teaching strategies. I saw whole group and small group instruction. I learned in some debriefs about how the teachers are collaborating weekly in PLCs, and they're looking at the curriculum assessments, the within curriculum assessments. We're using DIBELS as progress monitoring tools. And so they were meeting as teams, having those conversations. And this was a district that leaned into coaching. So I saw a really comprehensive, cohesive group at the grade level that involved the teachers, the coach, any specialists that pushed in, paraprofessionals. I just left feeling so inspired, and to be able to see that up close and in action. And this was a district that didn't really have a curriculum for 20 years. So it was a big shift. It was just the best 2 days I've spent this school year being in those classrooms and seeing what we have in our book come to life.
That's so special. And we know Dr. Anita Archer, she says learning is not a spectator sport. I think it's so easy to fall into the trap of like, you think explicit instruction can be a lecture, but really that engagement piece and how you talked about the role of the student just coming to life in a whole different way with the vocabulary and the opportunities to respond. That's embedded. That's not just happening when you walk in the room. That's happening all
No.
the time.
And seeing kindergartners, I was watching kindergartners read sentences, which some people think that it's not developmentally appropriate, but it was just to see the pride on their faces too, like, I'm reading this. It was great.
Yeah, beautiful. And then before we get into how to cultivate all of this magic, right? Maybe what are some of the barriers that hold schools back from having effective tier one settings?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm guessing some of your teachers by this point in listening to this conversation are thinking of some in their school right now, too. One of them that I think about often is just the lack of really true job embedded ongoing learning that we have as a culture in education. When I was writing the last book, MTSS, for reading improvement, I was reading the Joyce and Showers article from 1982. One of the things they were doing in that article, they were reporting on some data, but then they also interviewed a college football coach. And it's not something that I see reported out about this article much. And it was very interesting because they were comparing college athletes to teachers learning new skills. And one of the things that jumped out to me immediately was the idea that I bet college athletes take their jobs very personally. I know we as educators take our jobs very personally. It feels really personal when somebody comes into our classrooms, gives us feedback, and is watching us do our jobs, right? I'm guessing that it could feel the same way for athletes, but we know athletes regularly have people watching them. They're watching their own tapes, right? Every single week. And so they talked about, and I pull out a quote from there where they talk about the difference between athletes and teachers is that athletes do not expect that mastery will be achieved quickly or easily. but we have often behaved as though teaching skills are so easily acquired that a simple presentation, a one-day workshop, or a videotaped lesson will result in classroom change. And then the last sentence of that is why I've often put it on slides. It says, to the extent that we have communicated that message to teachers, we have probably misled them. And it puts the onus on the system, not teachers, right? Which I think is the big piece of that when you say, like, what are some of the barriers systems face? That's on the system, not teachers. We've created a culture where teachers expect from pre-service all the way through that they should be able to read about something or hear that somebody did something or see it at a conference, hear Anita Archer talk about it, and then they should be able to go into their classroom and do it. And it should be perfect because when they went to school, they were pretty good at school and they liked to play school from preschool on, right? And it's just not that way. This stuff is really hard. So the lack of really true job embedded ongoing learning where we're doing learning like college athletes do, where they're getting constant feedback on an ongoing basis in order to regularly really become a pro at each of these little but really important instructional shifts that we know make a big difference for student learning at tier one, but then also all the way across the continuum of what our students need, I think is a big barrier as we think about really improving instruction for everybody. And when I think about Kim, as you were talking about that, just that example of that classroom, I was just in my head ticking off the number of different skills that were happening in those classrooms, right, at the same time, and how big of a shift, especially when you mentioned they haven't had a curriculum in the past, how much change that must have been, and the amount of support that those teachers must have needed in order to make that amount of change, given how many different behaviors they had to learn in a that sounds like a relatively very, very short amount of time.
Yeah, I loved your answer, Sarah. The first thing that came to my mind was thinking about the dichotomy between system issues and teacher issues. There's a quote, I don't know who it's by, but it's something like, every system is designed perfectly to get the results that it's getting. I've seen in the last decade or more that teachers and teams are working so hard. And now that they're doing universal screening and progress monitoring, there's just a lot of angst about we're working so hard. Why aren't we seeing the results that we want to see in our classroom? And I'm a huge proponent that leadership is incredibly important when trying to improve tier one. So what I've always tried to say to teachers that I work with, and you echoed this, Sarah, is that stop thinking about this as I'm not a good teacher because I'm not getting 80% of my kids at target. It's blame the system because the system is designed to give the result for the results that they're getting. And making improvements to tier one is not one thing. It's like truly adaptive change where all of the things that Sarah talked about and that we've talked about with the definition of tier one, those are all things that have to be happening in synergy. And it's not easy, but I think we could be much better served in education if we started really focusing on the system and blaming the system rather than the people that are put into that system with the resources that they've been given.
And that becomes a whole other conversation. And I love both of the quotes that you shared, but that especially that Joyce and Showers excerpt about coaching in general. And as adults, it can be very intimidating to be coached or to have a coach walk in your room. But when that becomes part of the culture of the school and you have that job embedded coaching, it becomes this woven thread of this is business as usual. This is just what we do. And your success story, Kim, about how they had coaching embedded in the school day, I think it shows how powerful it can be rather than just having a one-off webinar or a one-off workshop. That was wonderful, but where's the follow-up and follow-through and support to continue the good work too? Does forming your skill-based groups feel a little mysterious? You have the screening data, but you're still asking, okay, how do I use this to move students forward? A good friend of the podcast, Dr. Stephanie Staller, runs the Reading Science Academy, and she created an exclusive grouping resource bundle free for Literacy in Color listeners. You'll get Stephanie's cheat sheets for grouping students at the beginning, middle, and end of the year, plus a video that walks you through a real classroom example. And June is the perfect time to dig in before fall screening. I'll always proclaim that I myself am a proud Reading Science Academy member for life, and I can genuinely say that the quality of the resources and professional learning is top notch. The Facebook community is also one of the most supportive spaces I've experienced. Reading Science Academy is honestly one of the first places I go whenever I have a question about literacy instruction or assessment. So go to readingscienceacademy.com/color to get your free grouping resource bundle today. I know a lot of systems tend to overemphasize intervention first. It's like, oh, we have all of these students who may need support. We need more interventionists. We need more intervention. Why do you think that strengthening core instruction is more powerful of a move than just putting all of our eggs into that intervention basket?
Yeah, I think that a lot of systems naturally default to focusing on interventions, in part because it feels more immediate and actionable. When you talk about tier one instruction and tier one improvements, it's not something that happens in a week. You don't just decide, oh, we're going to start to improve tier one. And it involves looking inward and really kind of unpacking. In our book, we talk about learning targets and curriculum and instruction and assessments and professional learning. It's all of those things. And tier one is hard. There's not that magical formula, and it's not a one size fits all. There's the ingredients that we know need to be there, but what that looks like and how it's deployed can sometimes be different. I also think that the many systems are built around identifying and supporting individual students rather than evaluating effectiveness. So the default question really becomes, what does the student need? Instead of, if you look at your data and you have large numbers of kids that aren't proficient, then you should really be asking, how well is our tier one system working? And if it's not giving us the results, we have to start unpacking that and figuring it out. I think there's also a skill gap that a lot of educators haven't been given clear tools or frameworks to evaluate tier one. And even when teams want to focus on the core or universal instruction, they're not always sure how to do it. I also think teacher beliefs and educator beliefs can play a role. I don't know, Sarah, in your experience, I go a lot of places where they want to jump to tier two or tier three, and I say, let's look at tier one. Oh, we worked on that. That's already in place. In reality, tier one instruction, there can be a lot of variability even within a school and within grades.
I know there's a lot of teachers who might be listening. Your curricular materials are impossible. Like, they're just impossible. And if you are a leader listening, your teacher's curriculum materials are impossible. And chances are, unless you are a newer leader in your school, the principals that I get to work with haven't taught the materials that their teachers are teaching now. And one of the activities that I sometimes do with principals is we actually plan a lesson with the grade level team, and it takes some time, which is annoying to everybody. Principals 100% of the time have said this is really eye-opening. One, because they see how much time it takes, but two, they see all of the pieces that are in the materials right now. And teachers are finding that they can't get through whole lessons. And a couple of things are happening. One, teachers aren't getting to decodables. And it's a problem K2 because your kids have to be practicing these skills in connected text. It's imperative. They are not going to be successful readers if they are not practicing these skills in connected text. I understand all the reasons that is hard. This is not the purpose of this podcast today. And they have to be doing it. The buildings that I'm in, so I'm going to now connect back to this item. Principals believe and curriculum directors believe that it's happening. So the beliefs of this piece, like when Kim says that there's a belief that tier one is already in place, 10 times out of 10, principals and curriculum directors in the schools that I work with believe that kids are reading the decodables in their programs. And when we do walkthroughs, when we go into classes, they're not in every class. And when we ask teachers about it, teachers are saying, I don't have time. We have too much in our materials. And they have other reasons too. And they're right. But there's a lot of beliefs. And that's just one example of the beliefs that are in place about Tier 1 that you don't know about until you start to dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the faults that come with some of these mandates from state to state that give you this approved list of curricula. And so school leaders think, oh, I could just pick from the list and then my tier 1 problems are solved because we picked something that's quote unquote aligned with the science of reading. And yet, like you said, it's not so easy. And going back even to that literacy block, oftentimes, even if a district has a heftier literacy block, there's not enough minutes in the day to get through everything as it's written. So it does take you rolling up your sleeves and seeing, like, what do we need to prioritize based on our data as well? And how do we move as a system beyond some of these surface level conversations like, oh, second grade's just low, or these kids just aren't that good at reading, into really identifying the root cause?
Yeah, great questions, Michelle. I think that's what this book is really designed to do. And I've been really happy to hear over the past I think, couple of years. This book is from 2019, and it's had a resurgence, I think, in the past few years of folks saying that they found the tools within it helpful at doing some of that, which was our whole purpose. Because what you just said about people think that they can buy a set of curriculum and it'll fix the problem, that's one of the reasons we wrote the book. That's really what the advice was back when we started writing the book. That was really the only advice you'd get around improving Tier 1 was buy a new set of curriculum materials. But to me, it's all about the questions that we ask. The questions that we ask is always going to determine the perspective that we take about anything in life. And so we really have to be super intentional about the conversations that we're having, about their purposes, and the specific questions that we'll ask allow us really to go deeper. So for instance, if I do a walkthrough with a principal, which I do quite often, and then we'll meet with a grade level team, we could ask, how is your reading program going? A really general question, and we'll get a pretty general response with that question. So I might get something positive. I'll likely get something pretty neutral, like, oh, it's fine, like we're doing good. It's okay. Sometimes I'll get something negative, like these are the things we don't like, right? There's too much in it, or this unit on this topic is really boring. And so, right, we'll get some of those things. But I can ask some more specific questions too. I can ask questions like, what lesson are you on? Or what parts of the lesson are most difficult for your students to complete without your feedback every day? Or what parts of the lesson do you have to skip because you don't have enough time to get to those parts? And then I can learn a lot more about what's helpful, right? And about what's going on in classrooms on a day-to-day basis. And I can dig in a little bit more. I can just learn more than what I learned from walkthrough alone. I can dig a little bit more deeply into what that is. And that's telling me more about the curriculum. And I can do that across different aspects of Tier 1 too, right? About the instruction and the assessment. And so we can do that, but it's all about the questions that we ask that help us really think about where our next steps are. And so we've provided in the book lots of questions, and then we try to help readers think about, there's too many questions. And so then we try to help readers think about where they might start, and then say, don't do all of these, but think about where you might start, then go there first, and then tackle it as a team to identify where in your school you might want to focus your Tier 1 efforts.
So thinking about how we can cultivate better leaders to be better question seekers, I think is a great first step too. And then what kind of things should be in place in a school in order for them to even develop an action plan? I guess people are coming from all different environments, but what kinds of components should they have in their day in order to even have some substance to think like, okay, this is how we can move forward?
That's a lot of the work that we do at my center is we do MTSS implementation reviews where we go out and objectively collect a lot of information about what their implementation looks like. And I think we're both pretty big fans of inventories and taking stock of what are the things that we're doing? How do those things align with MTSS? And really just trying to get a baseline of what's currently in place, what's working well, what isn't in place. And we're not asking what isn't in place to do the walk of shame. We're trying to figure out if something isn't in place, what's the barrier for why that isn't in place? But I think starting out and just collecting, whether somebody comes in and does an independent review or you do it yourself, just really trying to look at the assessments that you're using and the purposes of assessments. Do you have assessments in place? When we talk about universal screening, diagnostic assessments, progress monitoring, outcomes, making sure that you have an array of assessments that will answer those questions that are reliable and valid, and then really trying to set up an infrastructure that's in place that will support collaboration. So when I think of infrastructure, I'm thinking a little bit about people's beliefs about what MTSS is, what's the professional learning that we're providing, what are the resources, and how are those resources allocated, what types of teams exist in the building to support problem solving and improving outcomes. How is the schedule developed to support multi-levels of instruction and intervention? So it's really like that taking stock of what all are we doing, what's working well, what's missing, what's not working well. And then as far as action planning goes, Sarah and I have both been in positions where we've done this type of work and people ask us to write them an action plan. And I might have tried that once. It didn't work so well. What we do is try to facilitate a process so that the district can really deeply understand what their implementation looks like and have them prioritize. Of all of these things that you're doing well, and here's some things that aren't working, let's work together to identify those barriers. Once we identify barriers, that leads us to solutions and really work on prioritization, because too many districts I work with, they want to just jump in and try to do it all, or just too many things at once. And we know that that causes a lot of fatigue and exhaustion if you're part of that system, trying to do too many things. And sometimes those things aren't all aligned.
Yeah. And I'm happy you spoke to having the actual schools being the ones to create their own action plans, because especially, first of all, it creates buy-in when you're involved in saying, like, this is what's important to us. But also, I think it's really important for us to build the capacity of educators to, you talked about beliefs, but like for them to believe they can tackle this work. Like, I don't need some outside person telling me, you do this and you do that.
Right.
I think that's why the work that you do is so powerful, because you are facilitators of that. And that really leads to leadership empowerment and teacher empowerment, which is so special. Can you speak to the power of these collaborative teams? My experience is teachers who are excited about the science of reading or structured literacy, they have all their science of reading enthusiasm and they're doing all the things and they're seeing great results in their classrooms, but they're the lone rock star teacher on their own, rather than having a school-wide initiative. So why are teams so important to doing this work as well?
Yeah. And that can be over time, right? In the beginning, that's really exciting. And then over time, that gets disheartening too. I think your examples are really great. It is really important. Teachers know their students better than anybody else. They know their curriculum better than anybody else. They need to be the ones who are involved in making those decisions about next steps and about the plans. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. So while we want to go fast, because we know students are only in kindergarten once, right? They're only in second grade once. So we know the importance of going fast. And we know that in order to build capacity, we have to include everyone and we need to empower everyone. So we have to be really thoughtful about that. We also know that there's research that shows that consensus is built. So all of us agreeing on the same actions together and the same action plan. Consensus is built by us sharing common background knowledge. So when we think about all the work that's being done across states for people being trained in the science of reading and structured literacy and those things, we're building common background knowledge amongst all of us. And so we're kind of building that consensus so that we're all building that capacity together to be moving in the same direction, even if we're still building the strategies all together to be seeing it being kind of trickling down to the classroom at the same rate. So we do want to make sure that we're doing that collectively. We're building the action plan collectively. It doesn't mean, though, that everybody is going to do everything, right? And that we're all going to have equal roles on the team. And so in the beginning, it might be that that champion is the one facilitating the meetings, and they might be bringing maybe 2 to 3 evidence-based options for the next step to the PLC so that we make sure that we're doing an evidence-based routine, right? That we are doing the next step that's right given our data. So if I'm the one who's passionate about using our screening data, about using our curriculum embedded assessment every 5 or 10 lessons, I'm going to be the one maybe who's looking at those data because I'm excited to, and I'm going to bring them back. I'm going to find the evidence-based strategy. I'm going to bring them back. I'm going to bring a couple options because people like choices, but they don't like too many. So I'm not going to bring too many. And then I'm going to come back to our PLC and I'm going to say, hey, here's our data. I'm going to help people understand why. Then I'm going to give a couple options. Which ones do we want to try for the next week? So we're building the plan together. Everybody's empowered. They all understand why. We're building some consensus, but we're building the action plan together. So it doesn't mean everybody has to do exactly the same thing on the team, but we do need to bring everybody along and be building it together.
Yeah, I love that. And part of it is even just building the common language of what are we going to share with our students as a whole so that when they go to the next grade, they all have similar experiences, even if there's nuance to different styles or different teacher personalities, but they've had roughly a similar experience in terms of content and such too. And part of using the common language is giving students some of the same experiences. And so we get to this term fidelity, this big scary word that oftentimes will either make people really excited or make people cringe. Teach with fidelity, use the program with fidelity, and it can trigger a lot of emotions depending on who's listening. So when we think about this idea of fidelity or even using fidelity data, why is that an important piece to the puzzle?
2 things that come to my mind, and I'll let Sarah jump in too, is first of all, fidelity has this negative connotation sometimes because people think that they're being evaluated to see if they're doing what they should be doing. We're talking about fidelity, and it's at the system level. We're not evaluating the people, we're evaluating the support that we provided to make these things actionable. And a lot of the districts, I mean, I've worked in some, I've been in, so we expect a lot and we might develop an action plan and rattle things off. And then there's no support for the people that are implementing. And so we see some gaps with maybe they're not adhering to the way that the program is supposed to be developed. I don't think you can evaluate data if you don't have information about fidelity. When I think about fidelity, it starts with, if we're talking about interventions, do you know what the student's need is? So that you can actually select an evidence-based program and do a targeted intervention that's matched to student needs. That sounds really simple. That doesn't happen a lot. We get cookie cutter programs that kids get put into that aren't matched to their needs, and then they don't make progress. And so thinking about how we're training people to deliver an intervention or an instructional practice, making sure that the people that are delivering content are also bought in and engaged. We talk about dosage, like we're talking about tier 1. Is it 120 minutes a day? And what's actually happening when we go back and look at the instructional time that's allocated, looking at student engagement, looking at adherence. I think a lot of times people think of fidelity as, are we doing what we said we'd do with as much time as we said we'd do it? And those 2 are important, but it's also really important to consider all of those other things that I listed, like understanding what the problem is and matching what we're going to do to that problem and training people how to do that.
That's a really great point. And I feel like you can analogize that with so many things, like even a workout class. Somebody goes and you're going to say, like, this Pilates class, is it effective? Well, this person went 5 days a week and they gave it their all. And this person only went once a week and they kind of just showed up. We have to think about making these glaring statements about effectiveness of things when the input and output might differ. And I think that's a great way to look at it. And you think about instruction. When we think about implementing curricula or implementing an action plan and everyone kind of being on the same page, when can we evaluate this action plan? And when do we know we can deem it as effective or ineffective, or we pivot? Maybe we had some bumps along the road in the first few days and we're thinking, oh my goodness, this is not the right course of action for us. We should change our plan. Or do we ride that wave and try things out for a little bit?
Mhm. That's another great question. The hard part is it kind of depends, right? It depends on the bump. But the first thing to note really it does go back to that fidelity piece. So we really need two types of information. We usually think about the student data. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Where are students learning, right? But just as important, we do need to know if we were able to deliver those tier one improvements that we had identified. So maybe we had implemented that we wanted to do a new tier one change 5 days a week. So maybe we had said we were going to do some tier one practice. We were going to add in 10 minutes of reading practice using a partner routine every day. We were going to do partner reading with paragraph shrinking every day for 10 to 15 minutes, but we realized we were only able to do it 3 days a week, or maybe we never actually were able to start it, right? So because of that, the student data, we wouldn't expect the same amount of growth that we may have expected if we were able to do it 5 days a week. Now, that's not, again, as Kim said, about teachers necessarily, right? It's usually about the system. That's what I tend to see, that we didn't take into account shortened days or the schedule of specials or all of these other things that happen within schools, because schools happen to be really complex places. What we know, though, about ensuring effectiveness is that we actually need to start sooner than you might think. When we think about like progress monitoring work, we think about 3 and 6 week cycles in many schools that I'm in, right? So we come back together every 6 weeks. In the work that I do with schools, I tend to want leaders in classrooms within the first week. And I want also to have conversations about any tier one improvements that we put in place the very first PLC after we start it. Because what we've tend to find through the research is that it's not that we get things in place and then they fall off, but that we never actually get them in place at all. So it's not that I started going to Pilates 5 days a week and I gave it my all in the beginning. It's that I either like right away was like, I'm just going to show up and hope that by getting on the reformer, something magical happens, or right away the first week, right? I found 2 days that I couldn't show up. And so right away, we might find some reasons to support. And it's a lot easier for a teacher to feel confident telling somebody, hey, I don't have time to fit this in 5 days a week because of XYZ after week one, than it is to feel really confident to say that after month one. Having those conversations right away is a lot less vulnerable than it is if we make people wait a while to have those conversations. So we want to do that. We want to provide that support right away so that we overcome those barriers as a system together, right? And decide what those things are that we need to provide. And sometimes it is that we need to figure out the schedule, that we need to figure something out, that something isn't working. And sometimes it is that we need to change something about what we're doing for that tier one support, right? That it isn't the best match, that we might need a different type of tier one support within our system.
Yeah, that is such a great point. And what a nugget of wisdom to know that, hey, leadership needs to be stepping in week one, right away, make sure all of the things are in place for this action plan even to be successful.
And it doesn't have to be for teachers, like, it doesn't have to be like your principal, right? Like, it can be a coach, it can be a reading specialist, like, and it can be just your team too. So you don't have to feel like you have to call somebody out. I want you to feel comfortable, though, going to a leader if you need something. The reason I say leaders joining is that I want you to have help if you have a barrier that you can't overcome. If you can't do something that your teams, that your school had decided, if your school had decided you're doing class-wide intervention and reading, and they gave you a program and said, hey, you're going to do this 5 days a week for 10 to 15 minutes, and you can't because of your special schedule, I want you to be able to tell your principal that. And so that's why I say leaders joining PLCs. It's not because I think you need a heavy hand. It's because I think sometimes you need somebody to be able to say, hey, like, we've got a problem that we can't figure out ourselves. We need some help for that. But if you want to have those conversations yourself, you can absolutely do that too.
Yeah, definitely. And then when we think about the power of leadership sustaining tier one across the grades, within the grade, across the grades, and within the whole district, can you speak to the power of why strong leadership is so important in that way? I look at a principal as just having so many responsibilities and a desk full of papers, parent phone calls and such, but why leadership really plays an important part.
Yeah, I truly believe that leadership is the single biggest lever for sustaining really strong tier one instruction within an MTSS framework, not because the leaders own the instruction, but because they shape the conditions that make high quality, consistent instruction possible across the classrooms. So the words that I would use about why it is important is to think about clarity, coherence, infrastructure, data use, adult support, plus feedback loops. That if you have those things, that really helps ensure that tier one is predictable across classrooms, measurable at the systems level. And at the end of the day, we want it to be strong enough to really reduce the number of kids that need supplemental and intensive support.
That's beautiful. That's what we all should hope to see in all of our school buildings. And it really builds this whole community of like a different kind of ecosystem when things function in that type of way too. For educators or leaders listening, do you have one mindset shift or just a piece of advice that you'd like to leave when it comes to tier one?
Yeah. I don't want tier one work to be too scary. It's true that it's big and that it's not easy work. It's really never done. But
Right.
if you want to get started, if you're inspired and you know there's a need, start by just replacing 10 minutes of non teacher directed time in your day with high quality practice in reading. I can promise you that your students always need more practice in reading. If you don't know what else to do, give them more practice in reading using a high quality routine. If you do that right now, every day, there is a lot of research that shows that is a very high quality tier one practice. Class-wide intervention is what the research is if you want to look it up. But it doesn't have to be scary to get started. So I just encourage you, any classroom teacher can really get started in this work, and then just tackling it together is really where it's at.
I loved this question. I think the mindset shift or piece of advice is that tier one it's not where we start. It's what we're always doing and always responsible for. And I feel like in many systems, tier one quietly becomes the backdrop while attention shifts to interventions, specialists, fixing student problems. But I just go back to in a strong MTSS system, tier one is the main event, and MTSS is all students, and it's a school improvement framework versus lots of people thinking it's just about interventions.
I love that. I love that. And Sarah, as you were talking too, I was thinking of another archerism, just that success breeds motivation. And if we start with these small changes and see amazing outcomes, it just further inspires, I think, people to continue down this road and investing time in doing the work and seeing how this all can come together in center stage and seeing the show, as it is. And so this has been such a wonderful wonderful conversation. Your book is absolutely wonderful. It's such a helpful resource and a really great guide for school teams and school leaders to implement Tier 1 effectively and in an action-oriented way where it doesn't just feel like a roundabout conversation, but really figuring things out and how to improve student outcomes. So you guys both offer some wonderful consulting work and speak nationwide. And so maybe you can share where listeners can connect with you further.
Yeah, System Impact Consulting is the work I do, and I support schools through an MTSS Data Academy where I work with school teams to improve their MTSS by doing the work really that we've talked about, by using their data and just building their capacity to implement an MTSS that moves reading outcomes. And I just do that work. It's throughout the school year, and it's really rewarding and empowering for me. And I'm happy to have any conversations anytime with folks who want to have conversations about literacy and MTSS.
I would probably say the easiest way to find me is to Google Carey, Carei, University of Minnesota, and our center page will pop up. And we have a big core of literacy services that we provide. We have a foundational skills curriculum. We have a structured literacy professional learning program called Carry All that's about 50 hours of synchronous and asynchronous work, so a little less intensive than letters, but we've trained over 10,000 teachers on that. We have an intervention program called Press. We have designed and contact us with really any need you have for literacy or math or behavior MTSS, and we can customize something that meets your needs. So would be happy to follow up with anyone. I also do consulting, but you can find me on the Carey webpage.
Wonderful. I'll be sure to link that all in the show notes. So thank you again for sharing all of your expertise in helping solve this literacy crisis once and for all.
Thank you for all the work you're doing, Michelle, to really promote evidence-based practices in literacy and the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully. Do you ever catch yourself saying, English is just crazy? Maybe your students come across a tricky word and you tell them, you just have to memorize that one, or this is the part you have to know by heart. But deep down, you know it's still confusing. Here's the truth. English isn't random. It's a wonderfully complex system, and once you understand how that system works, through sound, structure, and meaning, everything changes. That's what Sarah, Paul, and I teach inside Mastering Morphology. This isn't another curriculum. It's deep teacher knowledge inside a practical, comprehensive course that finally shows you how words really work. No more exceptions, no more gimmicks or patching holes with memorization or phonics alone. It's time to go beyond sound it out and give your students the framework they need to truly understand words. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start teaching with confidence, join us inside Mastering Morphology. Enrollment is open now, so we invite you to click the link in the show notes to get started.